Regardless of what you think of the fees must fall national movement, it's definitely forced the hand of government. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight let's have a frank discussion with South Africa's Higher Education Minister Blade Nzimande, who's been in Parliament in Cape Town and joins us from Cape Town, as to how government is going to cover the estimated 3 to 5 billion rand shortfall in university funding in South Africa for next year. Minister, good evening to you. You've had a tumultuous 2 weeks dealing with an unprecedented uprising of South African students since our democracy dawned. How are you feeling after 2 weeks of intense interaction?
Indeed, it has been a challenging period for us as a country, and especially our university sector. We had not entirely not anticipated this dissatisfaction. As a matter of fact, there was a meeting between the President and the Vice Chancellors on the 6th of October discussing the very same issue of fees. Of course, we had not foreseen the scale that it could actually become this big. Now, in a way, students' mass struggles are not negative in themselves. Sometimes they are the necessary energy to confront the many challenges of transformation that our country still faces. Given what we inherited, we may be 21 years into our democracy, but we've still got huge challenges of transformation. Now, at the moment, we are finalizing, together with the Minister of Finance and the Presidency, we are finalizing identifying sources of funding to deal with the shortfall that is going to arise out of the fact that there shall be no fee increases. Of course, the potential sources of funding, one, the wealthier universities said they can make some contribution, but the rest of the money will have to find it from government, between my department and the Department of Finance, or from reprioritization from other departments in order to deal with this. But as government, we are committed to dealing with it. And also we are pleased that the situation generally seems now to be returning to normality in our universities.
Minister, that decision to not raise fees next year, government-driven decision overriding yourself. The President overrode yourself, who stuck with 6% this time last week. The meeting then on Friday decided on a 0% increase, and then for the universities themselves, it overrode the councils of universities too. Are we not at risk here of undermining the integrity of the university system?
Well, firstly, Bruce, let me say that I don't regard what the President did as overriding my decision. It's not unusual in any situation of negotiations or conflict that some compromises sometimes get rejected by the stakeholders. And in any case, I would not have had the authority of saying no fee increases for 2016. That could only have been done by the President, especially in his role as head of government. So I wouldn't regard that as overriding. But also I would like to say, in relation to your second question, that no, it's not actually undermining the universities. Already we had agreed in February this year with the Vice Chancellors that this issue of fees is causing a lot of angst, not only among students, fee increases specifically, but also amongst parents and communities in general. As a matter of fact, the President himself had raised this matter in January when he was addressing when he was delivering the January 8th statement on the birthday of the African National Congress in Cape Town. And I immediately engaged the Vice Chancellors. We agreed that we'll have to discuss the matter of fee increases, what's the criteria and all that. But then they requested that we can't look at fees outside of the cost drivers in higher education, as well as the funding, the amount of funding that government, the state, is giving to universities. We had agreed on that process. Unfortunately, we got overtaken by these events.
12 months from now, does it all happen again? Because surely the further and further behind the cost curve that universities fall, and the further and further behind the cost curve the government falls with continued extra funding for universities, do we not see these protests year in and year out? How do we prevent that from happening?
Well, what we've done immediately after the meeting, in fact, at the meeting of the 6th of October between the President and the vice-chancellors was to form a presidential task team which must look at short-term issues, financial issues for the beginning of 2016. In particular, it was going to be the issue of fees. Okay, now that's out of the way because everybody, well, most people have agreed that there shall be no fee increases. But the second thing which we were looking at for next year, which always provides challenges, is returning students who have passed but who have got debt with the university from the previous year or previous years, who then get excluded because they do not have money to pay. That's what the presidential task team, one of the things that it is looking into, on how to resolve that in order to ensure that we have a better start to the year next year. And then, of course, the second phase that will immediately kick in will be to look at the more medium to long term, which means from 2017 onwards, what actually then is going to happen. There is no doubt that government will have somehow be able to must actually raise some money to really begin to deal with some of these challenges. Okay, the challenges are not only money, but they are largely about money because...
Is it about government raising more money to plug the education gap, Minister, or is it about thinking about education in a different way and saying to students, if you can't afford to pay your fees, then donate your time. If you're a chartered accountant, give a year, maybe 2 years even of national service to municipalities or to SARS or something like that, in the same way as medical students are expected to pay back a year in return for getting one of the best medical degrees in the world. They give that back to communities. Is it not time to think more creatively about funding education rather than just throwing endless amounts of money at the problem?
You are right. We have to look creatively at this. For instance, one of the matters we are looking at is the possibility of community service for university graduates. Like it happens with the medical doctors, we are right. But also we are looking at the private sector. We have to look into the private sector because we are of the view that the contribution of the private sector is not in line with the benefits that they get because they are the single largest absorbers of university graduates, to be quite honest. So that's another area that we need to look into.
The corporate sector, Minister, sorry to interrupt, Minister, but the corporate sector provides employment. It provides an opportunity for government to tax those graduates at an elevated level. It also pays corporate taxes. It would argue, I would suggest, that it does its fair share and that the money that it pays in those taxes simply needs to be used smarter.
The issue, though, is that it has to be raised because, as I say, the question is, having done all that, is it adequate? Is it in proportion with the benefits that you actually gain from having these university graduates and so on? University education is very expensive, even more so in a country like ours with such huge inequalities that we have. Everybody will have to come into the party.
Minister, you've been on record saying that we really need to look more seriously at a wealth tax. I don't know if you met Thomas Piketty when he was in South Africa, but certainly his ideas on wealth taxes for the super rich around the globe are gaining traction. How seriously are you talking to your colleagues in Cabinet about that proposal?
Well, that's not my decision, you know, and it will not be my decision. It will have at the end to be Cabinet decision, Minister of Finance Cabinet decision. But I really feel that we should consider something along those lines. Either a wealth tax or, as COSATU, our trade union federation, has been arguing, because we've got a levy system from employers for training, we could increase the levy. We will actually have to look into that. I'm quite serious, although, as I say, that decision just does not lie with me as an individual.
Do you foresee the possibility ever of having universal free higher education, as has been requested by some students in the movement?
For the poor and maybe the lower middle classes, the government's policy at the moment is not free higher education for everyone. Students who come from relatively wealthy families and the very wealthy must actually pay for the system. But your working class, poor, and even lower middle class, your teachers, nurses who are battling, you know, and so on, I think that it's possible. South Africa is a very rich country, except that the resources are sitting with a tiny minority.
Should we not be looking at this university, this higher education system, also differently too? Lots of talk of the FET colleges, the talk of getting more of a technical basis to education as well. Perhaps we have far too many people who go to university to do the soft degrees, the arts courses, for example. Perhaps we should be channeling our resources more cleverly there too.
Bruce, you're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. I've just out of a meeting with briefing the portfolio committee, basically saying to them, we must not proceed from universities. We must proceed from provision for post-school education and training. Because we have at the moment, vocational colleges that are two-thirds the size of university. Those colleges should at least be 3 times in terms of being able to absorb people, because indeed it does put a lot of pressure on the university system. We need, in other words, to diversify post-school opportunities and training, which is the mandate of my department. But of course, as a department, we don't manufacture money. We will actually need to resources. The National Development Plan of government itself foresees quite a significant growth of the post-school education and training sector.
Should that be private sector led, or do you intend as government to lead it?
We think it must be led by government, it must be public, because in a country like ours, we still really need a very strong role of the state. Sometimes if you leave it to the private sector, it will then be governed by other principles that are at variance with a developing country which is committed to what we regard as a developmental agenda that also must redress the problems and the legacy of apartheid that we are not only still living with. In many ways, it's still reproducing itself in terms of the high levels of poverty and inequality. We feel that government and creating a large public system is what we need for post-school education and training, including university education.
Do we have the time for the state to get round to doing it? Surely if we incentivize the private sector adequately to do it within maybe a regulated framework, we get it off the ground a lot more quickly.
Well, we will have to cooperate. For instance, if we are talking about vocational education, there is no way that it can be government-led, but there is no way that government should do it alone. There will have to be a very strong partnership with the private sector, which is a program we are on now. By the way, we signed an accord with the private sector to support the placement of college lecturers and college students so that they get the necessary work placement. Also, part of the mandate, my mandate given by the president, is to strengthen industry-university partnerships. That we need, there is no doubt about that. The private sector has got a very important role to play in partnership with government. But we are saying government must take the lead, and also we must build a larger public post-school education and training system.
Do you get that private sector cooperation with a carrot or with a stick? What's your preferred method?
Both. Both. We have to use both there, Bruce, unfortunately. And that's global experience. Unless we are talking countries that have had a century or more of this, a country like Germany, for instance, with its well-known and famous dual system where employers take it upon themselves on their own to actually do this training. In many other countries, it's very difficult. So we have got to provide a carrot and stick.
There we
together.
go. South Africa's Higher Education Minister, Nzimande. Minister, thank you very much for joining us from our studios in Cape Town this evening. Thank you very much for watching as well. There'll be more Money Makers tomorrow. We'll shake up the show then. Good night for now. Bye-bye.